Welcome everyone to the Foresight Solutions Expo as part of the UN 2.0 week. This is the fourth day where we're spotlighting Foresight. We're honored to be convening this day as the UN Futures Lab, and we'll be spotlighting strategic foresight. We have done so already in a high-level opening panel. We've had some side events already, a total of 9, and a couple more to come. So if you haven't already, please have a look at the UN 2.0 website to see which side events are still upcoming today. And then today we have, of course, the Solutions Expo, where we're looking forward to seeing 2 presentations, which will be very interesting, focused on foresight, of course. We will be also sharing a link to the UN 2.0 week website where you can see the other days of the week. But before we get into that, it'll be great to hear who we have with us on the call today. Introduce yourself in the chat. You can share your name, your organization, where you're from. I see someone from Colombia, Turkmenistan, from everywhere. There's a lot of people joining us from around the world, New York, Malawi. It's super amazing that you could join us from all these different parts of the world, and a big welcome to you all. All right, so let's start with just framing what is UN 2.0. If you've been joining the other 3 days of UN 2.0 week, I'm sure you're familiar, but it's always good to remind us why we're all here. And today's session is part of just exactly what it is about, transforming the United Nations to meet the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. And UN 2.0 is our shared effort to build the capabilities, tools, and environment that multilateralism needs today. We're harnessing science, technology, and human creativity to deliver on development, humanitarian, and peace. Looking at these 5 key capabilities which we're focused on this week, at the heart of them is really these essential capabilities that have the power to truly accelerate our joint work towards these global goals. These are namely data, digital, innovation, foresight, and behavioral science. And all of these are underpinned by a change in culture, creating space for experimentation, collaboration, and shared learning. So throughout today's session, we truly encourage you all to share your questions in the Q&A function. You'll see the button at the bottom of your screen. This is truly meant to be an opportunity for you to probe deeper into the presentations that you will see today. We are lucky enough to have 2 presenters which have actually quite a bit of time to really dig into what they will present. It'll be a surprise for us as well, so we're truly looking forward to it. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer any questions that are in the comments, because you will see the comment section tends to get quite busy and questions will get lost. So if you do have a question, we please encourage you to use it on the Q&A, in the Q&A function. And then, of course, if something does come to mind during the Q&A portion, if you would like the question to be answered during that portion, it's really important that you share that question during that time as well, not afterwards. And let's see how much time we have left. We may be able to answer even more questions. All right, so with that, I'd like to hand over to Alana Poole, the Deputy Head over at UN Futures Lab, our global hub, and she'll just share a few brief words about what is the Futures Lab. Over to you, Alana.
Thank you so much, Kenny. And it's really wonderful to see so many colleagues connecting. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues and friends from across the world. Keep your comments and where you're from coming in the chat. Great to see that we're part of this global community that is interested in futures and foresight. And just very briefly, as Kenny mentioned, we are convening this. The UN Futures Lab is convening this day here as part of UN 2.0 week. And why? The spotlight on futures and foresight. Why is it so important? And Kenny already alluded to some of the reasons, and ultimately underpinning it is this change in culture. But as we all know, the world is changing very fast. We are in the conditions of uncertainty. And this uncertainty really causes us and propels us into changing the way that we do things. There is a need and real urgency for us to be more anticipatory in how we make decisions, more anticipatory in how we plan, more anticipatory for our different policy making. And that is what we try and do at the UN Futures Lab. So all the different side events, today's expo, the high-level session that took place just before this, the goal that we are trying to do here and bring together, yes, is strategic foresight and futures thinking, but for what? It is for action, ultimately. It is not to build capabilities and build capacities and do nothing with them. It is for action. It is to change the way that we act. And that is why I am so thrilled and excited to be part of this session now, this expo session, which is really about acting. It's practical, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the different colleagues about the different innovative solutions that they have, which are forward-looking. Ultimately, we need a multilateral system that is forward-looking, that is able to withstand these current shocks, and also able to adapt and change course and be flexible as and when the needs arise. So with that, I'm very happy to pass back to Yulia Kenny, who's going to explain a little bit of the format before we hear from our two guest presenters. Yulia Kenny, back over to you.
Thank you, Alana. So today's format is very simple. We've given all expo sessions across the week one simple instruction. Give your presentation in a pitch format. And basically what that means is short, punchy, to the point, and really highlighting some key takeaways from whatever it is that they're presenting. So across the week, we have seen presentations on initiatives, reports, research, different types of interventions, and it's been very interesting to see all these presentations, and the challenge as well to try and pack that all into 10 minutes or even less for some other sessions. So for today, we'll start with 10 minutes pitching per presenter, followed by a 10-minute Q&A. And like I mentioned already, if we do have any more time left over, we may be addressing some more questions, but let's see how each section goes. And who's presenting to us today? We're very excited, and we welcome two speakers. The first one is Bronwyn Williams from UNDP, and she's a strategic foresight advisor. And she will be followed by Manon Hamon, who is a livestock expert at FAO. Let's get started with Bronwyn. Bronwyn, if you are ready, we'd love to give you the floor, and go ahead, all yours.
Sure, I'm ready. We can start with the first slide. What I'm presenting on today is a very simple thing. So seeing how starting with signals, we can make a massive difference. Much like planting a small seed today can have a ripple effect and can grow into something quite impressive, magnificent, and of course fruitful for everyone. So I'm going to be talking to you about a problem that we had at the UNDP, or at least a challenge that we took upon to answer these questions. That is, how do we build an anticipatory culture? Just like the introduction was talking about, this is critical in times of change and uncertainty. We have to learn to be anticipatory so that we're not caught by surprise by things that we should have known or noticed, that we are able to have some sort of plan in our back pocket, that we can take that first step forward, even if things do seem uncertain. We also want to ask, how do we increase futures agency? Much like building an anticipatory culture, we also want a culture of agency, because again, just like the previous speaker was saying, anticipation is one thing, but anticipation without action just doesn't really move us forward. It still keeps us stuck exactly where we are. And very similar to that, how do we become more agile? How do we unwed ourselves from our plans when those plans are no longer fit for the future or even the present that we find ourselves within? And how then do we translate, to sum that all up, foresight into action with impact? We thought about that. So we are a large organization. We have eyes and hands and hearts all across the world. And essentially, we have to start somewhere when we're wanting to build a culture of anticipation and futures agency and agility. And one of the simplest ways we can start to act on the future is to simply start with a signal. A signal is small, a signal is simple, and a signal is accessible to absolutely everyone. What are signals? Signals, of course, are just something that indicates a potential pocket of the future in the present. It's something that gets you to stop and think. It's something from your vantage point, wherever that may be, that could add a puzzle piece, that could be useful to someone else, somewhere else, in terms of the future they are hoping to build. So we can move on to the next page. And essentially what I'm introducing you today is the platform that we built in order to do this. We decided to build a platform, and this platform is not even 3 years old yet. So we can move on to the next slide, and you can take a little look at how it looks like. And essentially, this platform is something that we have called the Future Trends and Signals System. It was built in conjunction with partners, and after lots of consultation, it was launched around about, I think it was September in 2022. And it's just a place for us to collectively, all of us colleagues across the UNDP, to collect the signals that we see in our parts of the world, in the places that we're living and working in, because we all see the world in a different way. And it's a way for us to bring all those signals together so that we can discuss them and learn from them and use them in our research. So it's, in essence, a home for inspiring change and exploring our futures together. It's a virtual place we can all come together with, contribute our thoughts, and not just the signal itself that we've noticed. We also have space to contribute why it is that we think whatever it is that we have spotted, be it a news article or even just a piece of graffiti we saw in the street or a conversation that we overheard, why that signal is, or why at least we think it is, or could be important to the work that we do in development. So it's a place for sharing, and it's a place for sharing as objectively as possible. This platform is, of course, custom built for us in that it's not open to the general public, but it is open to our entire organization. This makes it a safe space to share, and it also makes it a safe space to collaborate. The newer developments on this platform that have actually just been released in the course of the last week are the ability for teams in particular places in the world or working on a particular project to create their own signal, what we're calling sprints pages. So a little collaboration place too, to build upon. So it's not just a static database, it's a living ecosystem for us to build that anticipatory culture. And as to where it has gone and what we have achieved, we can move on to the next slide there to show you how, starting with just a single signal in the system in September 2022, we now have over 2,000. When I put this together yesterday, there was 2005 signals. Today we're up to well over 2015, and it's growing all the time. And those signals have been contributed by a living, breathing community of over 450 signal scanners. We are working in the Strategy and Futures team, which I'm a part of, to grow that signal scanning database so that we have scanners in every office and in every community of practice where we have representation. And we don't just, as I said, leave people to go and spot those signals on their own and browse through it for their interest. We also are building a community that's centered upon this one place where we can all kind of call our home to come and contribute what we're seeing in the world. And what we've been doing there is every Tuesday, and we alternate time zones to make it inclusive for all of our colleagues across the world, we host what we call Signal Studios, where we look at the recent signals that our colleagues have put into the system, and we discuss them, and we choose topics that are of global interest to everyone, so that our community can feel they're not just being heard, they're also actually being listened to, that what they contribute actually matters. We have email newsletters and Viva Engage and Microsoft Teams communities that also keep the conversation growing. But even that's just all the starting point. What we're really trying to get to is to this kind of motto that we have, which is that every change starts with a signal. And that means, conversely, the signals that we're collecting and curating on this platform have to also inform change in order to be successful. And there we're starting to see some fruits from our work in terms of our growing global case studies, which you can read on the open website, on the Futures portal that the UNDP Futures and Strategy team puts together. We're publishing these strategies quite regularly now, where we've seen country officers engage this platform to inform their research and to inform futures-orientated projects to address the real challenges where our colleagues are working. We've just got a couple here on the screen for you, including in Kosovo, including in Egypt's Nile Delta, and in Uzbekistan too. So we see all across the world, people paying attention, just noticing what's going on around them can create change in other parts of the world too. And then also worth mentioning, some of the other fruits of this project have been essentially using this platform to inform our horizon scanning and our research for our team's own trend research, including most recently the Landscape of Development report that was launched towards the beginning of this year, which is again open for anyone to read, which is a very comprehensive, very collaborative document that started again by looking at the signals our colleagues have picked up on. Other publications you might notice include, of course, the Signal Spotlight report, which focused on the more kind of on the horizon 3, as us futurists would say, trends that could lead us in and towards preferable, hopeful futures for our future generations too. And I'm not sure if the last slide I tried to sneak in between this presentation made it onto the master deck, but I wanted to close off with this quote from one of our colleagues in Cambodia, who is a part of our most recent case study to come out of our futures and signal scanning work across the organization. And I really like this quote from our colleague there because, as he says, this became practical. One of the biggest shifts they found was that of confidence, seeing how pivots or signals connect and how those connections can influence real world outcomes. And it's transformed how they discuss their work. And of course, this is the sort of impact that we want to see. Every change, as we're trying to say here, starts with a signal. And our encouragement to those of you who might be looking at this is twofold. Firstly, to try and find a place and a home to collect signals. And then also to understand that signal scanning makes more sense, as we like to say, with friends. It should be a conversation where each of us can check and challenge each other's biases and pull a bigger, bolder, more inspiring picture about what our collective future could be. So I'm going to pause there. And as I said, just leave it up to you to say, what sort of small changes can you anticipate from the signals that you see around yourselves?
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. That was such a clear and engaging presentation. I mean, you had my attention the entire time, and I think you beautifully summarized everything in such a short time. We have a few questions in Q&A that I would like to read out to you. The first one was from Natalie Paul, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She says, I'm curious about who contributes with signals, any data or regional contributions and type of stakeholder. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so the good news is we've got stakeholders or contributors to the platform from all over the world. We're also working to do what we're kind of calling a virtual roadshow, where we try and support specific officers that might be working on a project to encourage them to contribute, like what I mentioned, those signal sprints. So one of the ones we're working on at the moment is with Brazil. It's been very interesting to note that the Latin American region has been some of our most enthusiastic contributors of signals. We've also seen quite a lot from Central Asia recently. So it kind of seems to go in ebbs and flows. when teams come together to scan for signals around a particular project, we definitely see more movement on the platform. But then we also put out challenges. So we do ask our scanning community if we are hosting, say, a signal studio on the Tuesdays, like I mentioned, around a particular topic, then again, we get a wave of signals of people who are interested in that topic. So I can't answer that question directly, but I would say that it's been great to see places who formerly wouldn't have had perhaps much representation being represented here just by simply people being interested in the world around them. So it does move around, but we've seen people from communities of practice in the world of economics and policy getting very excited. We also see technologists contributing what they see. And because it's an open place, we get quite a rich garden of different sort of seeds of the future all kind of growing together because everyone's interested in something different and everyone has something to add to the conversation.
Thank you. That sounds truly impressive. Another question that we have here is, how are you ensuring that the trends and signals captured in your Foresight system reflect the lived realities of marginalized communities rather than reinforcing dominant narratives or data biases?
Yes, that's a really hard question. In terms of like quality controlling the signals, in terms of not allowing biases to creep in, we do have an editorial team that reviews all the signals that are contributed on the platform to make sure they're using inclusive and objective language that is not alienating people. So that's the one way that I can answer that from a kind of editorial top-down perspective. But really, the way we're trying to answer that question to make sure marginalized voices are highlighted and included is by being very proactive and trying to grow our signal scanning community and encourage all employees regardless of their official title or their rank in the hierarchy to contribute to this platform. In that case, it's very democratic. Your boss and yourself can both contribute, and your topic is just as important to the conversation. And then every week we highlight in our Signal of the Week newsletter one of the most interesting and challenging and provocative signals, which can come from all sorts of people in all sorts of different places. So to kind of answer that question, we've created an opportunity that does allow for your contribution to be kind of disconnected from your hierarchy and from your position of privilege. It's the content that speaks for itself. But by the same token, we need to contribute in order for your voice to be heard. So we do quite a lot of work encouraging people to bring their colleagues, bring their new colleagues to Signal Studios to get involved with the platform to see how to contribute. And we encourage people that every signal is valid. If you find something interesting, someone else is going to find that interesting too, and there'll be a connection that can build upon that. So we encourage people to contribute more, not to overthink, but to bring their voice so they can be part of it. And of course, then we credit our signal scanning community in the publications that are published, like the Signal Spotlight and, of course, the landscape paper. So it's important. There's this great incentive to contribute here because that little thing that you noticed and put in the platform could end up shaping the strategy of our organization or changing a policymaker's perspective. Like that's what we say. The big change starts with a small signal that can just shift thinking in a little bit of a different direction. So I hope that goes some way towards answering your question.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Another question we have here is, seeing that these signals can also be useful for people working in other agencies in the UN system, would it be possible for UNDP to open the Future and Signal system to other UN agencies?
That is a question above my authority grade. We were just talking about that, but it is something that we'd be definitely open to collaborate more with UN agencies on. And we're very keen to share the learnings that we've had in terms of building this platform. If anyone else is interested in kind of replicating a similar system wherever they are, the good news is we've kind of gone through a lot of the teething troubles that they always are with building any sort of technological platform. We kind of know what the FAQs are and where the common pitfalls are. And if anyone is interested in reaching out to myself or the rest of the Strategy and Futures team, we'd be very happy to talk you through that.
That sounds great. Thank you. And a final question to you, Bronwyn, is how do you ensure that signals don't contribute to more noise? How do you ensure that they lead to meaningful analysis? And what is the theory or theories of change underlying the collection and analysis of signals? So there's quite a bit in that question. I don't know if you want me to repeat it. There's 3 questions in one, essentially.
I'll give it a go, and you can always correct me if I get something wrong there. In terms of how do we make sure signals don't contribute to noise? Well, I'd have to say, as a futurist, like noise is very much in the ear of the beholder, right? Like some of us listen to jazz and we hear noise, and others hear beautiful music, right? And that is the thing with signals. Like we're looking for things that are interesting to you because somebody else is probably going to think that's interesting too. We quality control them in terms of fact checking to make sure that people are putting out correct information, and that, as I said, try to not make them subjective and make them much more objective, noticing of something has happened. But we're not here to judge whether something is interesting or important. That depends on the work that you're doing, and things that are irrelevant to me could be very, very relevant to someone else. In terms then of how you plug your signal scanning and horizon scanning into theory of change, into your strategic planning process, whatever that might be, that's a very big question and really depends on your workflows. I'm not here to pitch this, but one of the big projects our team is also working on at the moment is in trying to figure out how we can take everything from signal scanning right through to the full Foresight process and plug it into both our portfolio approach and into the country planning documents process. So it's a case of trying to figure out how these things can support the strategic journey you're already on and the processes and plans that you have in place, rather than trying to dictate that the other way around. So that's a very open-ended question. It's really a case of not this dictating what that theory of change is, but rather supporting it. And that's very much the way we see ourselves in our department, in the way that we work in the UNDP.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. We have quite a few more questions for you. So let's see if we have some time left over towards the end. We may be able to address some of them. But now to keep on to schedule, let's hand over to Manon soon. If we can have her slide up so I can then pass the mic to her shortly. So Manon will be presenting Shifting Livestock Policy from Reactive to Proactive. And we're looking forward to your presentation, Manon. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us. Well, we all know Tony Blair, and whether one admires him or not, he once gave a very clear answer when he was asked about the top priorities of his country: education, education, education. His point was very simple, yet powerful. Real change requires focus. So, well, unfortunately, not all countries follow this principle, and rather than concentrated on a few key priorities, many governments try to do too much at once and end up having limited impact through their action, which leads me to the next slide, please. Yes, next slide. Thank you. So we saw this firsthand when we began engaging with Kenya, where we met two local governments from 2 counties in Kenya who are trying to address hundreds of challenges to support and sustain livestock development. And today, there are around 40 livestock-related policy strategy plans in the country. They cover everything: animal health, water, breeding, market access, foodborne diseases, and more. So altogether, these policies contain over 1,000 priority actions. Yes, you heard it correctly, more than 1,000. So now, imagine you're a county governor, one of the 47 in Kenya, tasked with implementing all of this with limited resources. What would you do? How can you achieve on the ground and support big progress and social development if you try to do everything? Well, we think you cannot. So what's the alternative? Next slide, please. So instead of reacting to complexity by trying to address every constraint, every challenge, we chose a different path. we decided to be proactive and to stop asking what's holding us back and start asking, where do you want to go? So to push this vision, we used the 3 Horizon framework to guide our collective thinking and build a preferred future, not just a vague vision where everyone is happy, but a concrete picture of the livestock sector that would lead to food security and improve livelihoods. So what's the 3 Horizon framework, which you can see on the slide? It's a Foresight tool that supports a constructive conversation around 3 key questions. So first, you look at what is your preferred future. That's the right part of the graph. Second, what is our current reality and which elements of the present should be preserved because they contribute to that future. And this is the red plain line. And eventually, which emerging trends and innovations are already pointing towards the future we want. The pocket of change I heard also from Brunwill. And these that should be scaled up. And this you can see on the black plain line. And eventually, third, you will look at what actions we need to must take now. So this corresponds to the transition zone in the middle to move from where we are now to where we want to go. And that means identifying doable, implementable actions for which it's time to allocate resources. And this approach doesn't ignore the complexity, it embraces it, but with direction, purpose, and a shared vision. So next slide, please. So the 3 Horizon framework from our experience was a game changer. Suddenly, stakeholders were no longer overwhelmed by the endless number of livestock policy priorities, but instead they began to think differently. They started to own their future and develop a vision of what they wanted and why, and selected a few key priorities for livestock development. So let me now tell you the end, or rather the beginning of the story for the 2 local governments. In Kiambu County, the stakeholders agreed that food security was the top priority, and identifying and focusing on the mid-sized livestock producers, poultry farmers, to increase supply of milk, eggs, meat, but also to create jobs in the county. In Nairobi City County, the conversation took a different turn. Extension services were provided to a limited number of livestock producers, generating little benefits. So Nairobi is a consumption hub. And with a high level of urbanization, the real issue was not really production. It was food safety, safe food placed on the market. So Nairobi chose to focus its efforts on food inspection to protect consumers and ensuring safe, high-quality food. So now, both counties are revising the livestock chapters of their development plans, and we really hope these plans will be structured around simple, clear objectives that make it easier to collaborate, build effective teams, and spend taxpayer money more wisely. So we really were convinced by this approach, but what do you think? Do you think it can be scaled up? And on behalf of the whole FAO team, thank you very much for your attention, and a heartfelt thank you in particular to Ugo Pikia Chamara, who led this initiative with vision and drive. Thank you.
Thank you, Manon. That was such a compelling story. I love how you took us from the beginning where we imagined ourselves in the position all the way to the end. That was really great. A reminder to all that you can use the Q&A function to share your questions. I see some questions have come through the comments, and it's quite tricky for us to keep up when there's so many other comments coming in. From my end, Manon, I will take a question that was a little more generalized towards Foresight, and it is, how can we make Foresight work more inclusive of indigenous knowledge and community intuition, especially in areas where data is limited?
So yeah, I will hand it to Ugo to answer my
Oh
colleague
yes,
Steve.
Ugo, over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think that I think a game changer comes when we start moving away from our daily problems, right? And we can engage in a very open conversation. And when we look long term, what happens is that everyone doesn't feel obliged, let's say, to defend his own or own agenda, right? And in this way, what had happened is that we manage really to also include in our conversation indigenous knowledge. For example, one of the elements that we want to keep in one of the futures that Manon highlighted are, small indigenous breeds, to preserve biodiversity, right? And that was an element very much accepted, right? But it was part of a broader, vision, a long-term vision, of a decibel future that all stakeholders, agreed upon. And really, my feeling is that when we start looking, 15, 20 years ahead, we are really able to be open, transparent, even with ourselves, and to embrace, the knowledge, the capacities of everyone to contribute to that future without necessarily, fighting with our own, let's say, niche or daily constraints.
Thank you so much, Ugo. We have two more questions here from Mohammed, and it's very much from a youth. The first one is from a youth perspective. So as a youth advocate working with youth in rural communities, I'm curious, how can we involve young people, especially those from farming families, in shaping more proactive livestock policies?
Steve, do you want to take this?
Yes, so thank you, colleagues. An interesting moment, and I want to attempt to respond to this young, promising upcoming farm livestock keeper. The engagement of all the interested parties, interested entities in the discussions to be able to fetch, to shape the future and where we are going, and using the very much imaginative minds of this young generation, really very key in supporting, shaping. Initially, it could look a more abstract future, but because their minds can stretch far much more than the older generation, using this young generation into these discussions and the dialogues, like what we did, because they were part of the discussion and the dialogues, and they were bringing in very interesting perspectives that were oblivious to the older livestock keepers. And I think it's just deliberately having to target these young generation farmers into these discussions, and they are bringing in a lot of insightful, futuristic that can be able to help shape where we are going in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A second question from Mohammed is, what were the most significant cultural or institutional barriers you faced while shifting from reactive livestock policies to a foresight-driven approach? And how did you overcome them?
Yeah, perhaps I may take it. One of the big challenges, to be honest, is that there is a sort of inconsistencies between a long-term view and the policy cycles, right? Because as you can imagine, policy cycles are usually 4 or 5 years, and many policymakers expect or would like to see some impact, let's say, on the ground during their tenure. And this, creates, of course, challenges. So what we had to do, two things I would say. First of all, okay, we looked for, counties, local administrations in Nairobi, where there were really open up leaders. And the second point is that we really tried to engage the private sectors. At the end, the engine of growth is always, the private sector. There are limited resources, as you can imagine, that governments in any part of the world can currently invest. But when, the private sector is on board and it drives in a sustainable way, a discussion about the future, then, policymakers cannot be simply, ignore what you're saying. So the engagement really of the, I would say, actors that can really make a change on the ground. Here we're working in agriculture, we're working on livestock, and as you know, it's just a private sector that makes a difference. There are the farmers that invest, then you have the traders, then you have the retailers, and of course you need all the policy framework, but at the end, they are the ones who are making the change. So what matters really the most to start looking beyond and avoid any kind of, let's say, the bottleneck is really to engage from the very beginning the private sector. And, you know, our role as a UN was really to facilitate the dialogue so that, you know, the famous corporate social responsibility, all the sustainability dimensions were taken into account into this dialogue when trying to look at testable future for the livestock sector in our case.
Thank you, Ugo. If I could invite Bronwyn back, if you could put your video on. I actually have a question that can be addressed to both Expo presenters today. And it is, what role do you see for civil society, youth networks, or community researchers in shaping and validating foresight models, particularly in areas where localized knowledge is critical?
I can go. I mean, from my perspective, I think it's critical. We're involved in, as I said, quite a big project with Brazil at the moment, and most of our research time is being spent there with stakeholders that aren't to do with the direct government or ourselves. Like, you have to talk to people, have to be included in their own future. This is like critical to anyone that's wanting to engage in this space, because our future as humanity is the sum total of all of our choices. And if we're not looking at everyone that's involved with that, which is really everyone, especially the people that aren't featured in magazine articles or featured on television programs, who don't get to hold the microphone, those people that are invisible are probably the people that are most important to understanding both our current present, but also in terms of what's going to shape our future. And if you're not including those voices, not only is, of course, that going to perpetuate biases and perpetuate problems and issues of the past, it also means your understanding as a researcher or as a policymaker of the current reality is flawed. And that means that the decisions that you take, that you think will work in a certain direction, might actually end up being entirely wrong to address whatever problem it is that you're trying to address. So it's absolutely critical. We are limited in terms of our tools there, because you only know who you know. You only look where you think you know where you're going to look, which is why we started with the signal scanning community, because at least it's giving us more eyes looking at the challenges in the world. And then as a researcher, you can go and interrogate that and find the people behind that signal to go and connect with them. So that's one of our tactics. And then, of course, signals and features are best with friends. So you have to talk to people too. You have to dialogue with them. And another one of the sort of critical things in my philosophy of the future is that the whole foresight process is not a project, it is a process. If it's not a collaboration, if it's not a dialogue, it's not adding value, it's just creating work. So if you're not putting people in the center, and people who are not usually in the center, then I don't think you're really doing foresight.
Thank you. Colleagues from FAO, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, maybe Steve, you want to take this one?
Yeah, we experienced involving not your usual stakeholders, who, of course, for the many years have been providing solutions that seemingly maybe have not been very impactful, and going beyond that to just getting in those who are probably been left out in the discourse and the dialogues, and we were able to zero on some of them, and particularly looking at that very simple young man who is called to come and slaughter chicken at night in a farmer's house, and coming to see him bringing up what he thinks the future of the broiler farming in the county looks like, bringing in very new ways of thinking that has not been had before. We found this really very inclusive, and it brought in a lot of insights that is shaping the way even the governments are trying to think on how they want to legislate, how they're going to develop the programs for the sectors.
And if I may chip in here, I would like just to say something that is perhaps, always or often we forget to consider. You know, in Africa, or at least where we are working right now, you know, in Kenya, the median age is 20 years old. So basically, by default, you cannot do anything without engaging, the youth, and they are the one that's really an energy which is unbelievable compared to what we have, let's say, in inverted commas, industrialized economies. And Kenya is not even one of the youngest, I would say, countries in Africa. So I would say that, taking a Foresight approach, and engaging the young people is really not so difficult. I mean, actually, we do something badly wrong in case we are unable to engage the youth, given that really the majority of the population, at least in the African continent and our experience today, I mean, are really very, very young.
Thank you, Hugo. And that's quite evident in the comment section. We're seeing a lot of people calling out youth foresight, or, the fact that they're so excited about these conversations as youth, that it's moving forward, a conversation that is really important to them. Also in our high-level openings panel that we had just before this, we had Fisayo, who spoke beautifully and was quite inspirational in saying how youth need to be at the table and not just called to for insights. And I'm paraphrasing terribly here. She was more eloquent in how she explained it. So also just to say in the comments, there's been a lot of positive feedback from both the pitch presenters. So very great job done. I hope you didn't feel too much like being in the lion's den with these pitches. I know it can be quite intimidating at times. I think you really inspired the audience. There's a lot of positive feedback. So if you can scroll through at some point, please do. Looking at time, we're doing amazing, and we've been able to really address a lot of the questions. And for now, I believe we can move on to wrapping up. Firstly, just to say a big thank you to our presenters. And if you could go into the slides, please. Thank you. Yeah. So basically, we just once again would like to thank you for joining UN 2.0 week. If you have already been joining some of the other days, the 3 days prior to Foresight Day, I'm sure you found all the sessions to be quite engaging. We're towards the end of the week, and we're closing off the week tomorrow with culture. So please be sure to scan the QR code that you see on the screen. Not only to join our communities, that's step one, that's amazing. We have these communities of practice. For Foresight, we have the UN Strategic Foresight Community of Practice. We highly encourage you, if you are a UN colleague, to join that community of practice. And also, if you're interested in any of the other quintet areas, please do join those communities as well. Next slide, please. So tomorrow you'll see that there's a high-level panel, there's a Solutions Expo, and 9 side events. Really wrapping up a really great week. We still have a couple more Foresight side events that will happen right after this. So go back to the website. The QR code will be shown on screen shortly, where you can see the full program of the events. We can leave that on for a minute. And if you scan that there, you will see different registration links for the different events. And before we wrap up completely, I would love to hand over to Alana, just if she would like to say a few words before we share our last screen. Alana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eula Kenny, and thank you so much to all the colleagues who presented today. It was really fascinating, and really we have showcased here from theory to practice to action, which is what we wanted to ensure came throughout the whole day, from the beginning, from early side events to the high level event where we talk with different types of policymakers, colleagues from different sectors in the multilateral system, always ensuring that we have a purpose. Foresight for what? Foresight for action. And this, I think we've heard very clearly in the 2 presentations today. So thank you so much for those. I also was very, very pleased to see the different comments in the chat and in the Q&A, and this focus on youth, on participatory methodology, on inclusivity, And the really the emphasis here that every voice counts. It is all of our futures, and it is for all of us to be heard when developing and hopefully creating the preferred futures that we have some control over. I also heard a lot of reference to community level. So community level, different types of community groups, including research, because this is something that we need as well to complement this action. But how to ensure that the lessons learned in these different actions can be scaled and can be replicated and used elsewhere. No need always to start from scratch, but build upon the lessons learned in different contexts. Of course, adapt them to the context in question, but build upon some of the lessons learned. And I think that's really important when we think about practical ways for scaling up some of these different fantastic initiatives. So I just want to say a huge thank you from the UN Futures Lab side in terms of how we're trying to help build the consistency of futures and foresight across the UN system. This has been really fantastic, very eye-opening, and shows that we are moving collectively together as a UN system, but also all our friends and colleagues from beyond the UN system, that we move away from theory and we really move into practice. So as I said at the beginning, we change the way that we do business so we can be more proactive, less reactive, and ensure that many diverse perspectives are brought into how we take decisions with a more forward-looking lens. So I want to say thank you so very much on behalf of the UN Futures Lab, and I will pass back to you, Kenny, for the final slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana. And I have to agree with you that this was very inspirational and really truly something that was a joy to moderate. If we could move to the next slide, I would just like to show yes, there we go. So continue to engage with UN 2.0 and the network. You'll see the contact details there. But for now, it's a goodbye from us, and we wish you a fantastic rest of your day. Goodbye.